People listen differently when they think the message didn't come from another human voice, because advice can be debated, ignored, laughed at. Instructions feel heavier. Final ones even more. A final instruction suggests patience has expired, that repetition failed, that softness didn't work. It implies you were already warned, already nudged, already given space to figure it out on your own, and still chose comfort over change. The idea of a final instruction isn't about fear, it's about clarity. No metaphors. No second chances disguised as hope, just truth stripped of decoration. When something is labeled final, excuses lose their charm. You can't say you didn't know. You can't pretend it was optional. You can't bargain with it later. It's not emotional, it's decisive. Most people spend their lives negotiating with responsibility. They wait for signs, confirmations, perfect timing. They confuse mercy with permission. But a final instruction doesn't arrive to persuade you. It arrives because persuasion already failed. It's not loud or dramatic. It's calm in a way that should make you uncomfortable. Calm like something that knows the outcome whether you listen or not. People like to believe guidance will always be gentle, that it will comfort them, reassure them, meet them where they are. But sometimes guidance sharpens instead of softens. Sometimes it draws a line instead of opening a door. A final instruction doesn't care how you feel about it. It cares whether you act. What makes it unsettling is that it doesn't demand belief. It demands alignment. You don't have to understand it fully. You don't have to like it. You just have to stop pretending you didn't hear it. Because once something is clear, ignorance stops being an option and becomes a choice. A final instruction implies that time has already been spent, that patience has already been extended, that silence was already used as a teacher and you kept mistaking it for absence. It suggests that the distance between where you are and where you need to be is no longer negotiable. People often expect divine messages to feel comforting, but the most honest ones feel confronting. They don't tell you who to blame. They tell you where to stand. They don't explain everything. They remove confusion. And confusion was never the real problem anyway. When you hear something framed as final, your instincts wake up. You feel the weight of accountability, not because someone is watching, but because something inside you recognizes truth when it stops whispering. Final instructions don't threaten punishment, they expose consequence. This isn't about destiny or fate or being chosen. It's about responsibility catching up, about being told clearly and without room for reinterpretation that the phase of wondering is over and the phase of doing has already begun, whether you're ready or not. That clarity is brutal. People spend their lives craving it, fearing it, pretending it exists when it doesn't. They wrap themselves in half-truths, comforting lies, and vague directions because ambiguity feels safe. It cushions the fall, it protects ego, it allows postponement. But clarity doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care about excuses. When clarity arrives, it arrives stripped of ornament, exposed, merciless, and it demands recognition. It cuts through all the noise you've built around yourself, all the illusions that have kept you believing you were in control, and forces you to face exactly what you've been avoiding. Most people think clarity comes slowly, gently, a series of signs, hints, and reassurances. That's a fantasy. Real clarity is immediate. It doesn't ask for preparation or consent. It doesn't soften the edges or present choices that feel comfortable. Clarity is a spotlight on truth, and when it lands, everything you've been ignoring becomes impossible to overlook. All the convenient excuses vanish instantly, leaving only facts. You realize that the comfort you relied on was nothing but borrowed time, that your indecision was just a cushion for consequences waiting to arrive. Clarity exposes contradictions. People tell themselves stories about who they are, what they value, how they act. They reassure themselves with narratives that sound reasonable, that make sense in quiet moments, that fit neatly into their self-image. But clarity doesn't respect stories. It only respects reality. When a final instruction arrives, clarity shines on every discrepancy, every small lie you've told yourself, every moment you chose ease over action. You see the difference between who you thought you were and what you actually did. The spotlight doesn't forgive or soften, it exposes. Clarity demands attention at the exact moment when most people are still half asleep. People like to believe they have time to interpret, to reflect, to negotiate with truth, to filter reality through the lens of comfort. A final instruction with clarity removes that luxury. It doesn't ask you to interpret slowly or act comfortably. It doesn't offer a safe path to gradual understanding. It requires instant recognition and forces the mind to confront consequences that have been accumulating quietly, invisibly, while life went on as usual. Clarity also dissolves rationalization. Humans are experts at convincing themselves that danger, responsibility, or necessity is optional. They tell themselves, I'll deal with it later, or it's not urgent yet, or someone else will handle this. But when clarity arrives, rationalization becomes impossible. The excuses sound hollow because the truth doesn't care about timing or convenience. The clock doesn't bend to your wishes, and clarity doesn't negotiate. Every second you spend avoiding acknowledgement becomes weight pressing down on your awareness, demanding acknowledgement you can no longer defer. The discomfort of clarity is not in what it tells you, but in what it reveals about yourself. It shows where you failed to act, where hesitation became inaction, where avoidance shaped outcomes. People fear looking at themselves, this honestly, because it removes all the protective narratives they've built. Comfort, identity, perception, and delay, all the things that make life bearable, are exposed as illusion. The unprepared mind flails under clarity's weight, because it has never been confronted with truth stripped bare. Clarity forces choice, not the abstract, hypothetical kind, not the I'll decide someday kind. Real choice, immediate, unavoidable, and consequence-laden. When a final instruction arrives with clarity, you realize that doing nothing is not neutral. Ignoring the instruction doesn't pause time, it accelerates consequences. Every hesitation becomes a decision by default. Every delay compounds risk. Clarity doesn't allow waiting, it only exposes the cost of waiting in real time. Even preparation feels different under clarity. People often think preparation is about gathering information, resources, or reassurance. Real preparation is about alignment. It's about seeing what matters, acting decisively, and refusing to hide behind excuses or comfort. Clarity highlights who has prepared and who has only imagined preparation. Those who react decisively appear calm. Those who rely on illusion flounder. The difference is visibility. Clarity makes it impossible to hide. Clarity also redefines urgency. Most people misunderstand urgency as panic or noise. Real urgency is simple. It's the recognition that the moment to act is now, and the cost of hesitation is already measurable. A final instruction coupled with clarity doesn't scream or dramatize, it simply illuminates the exact point at which action becomes unavoidable. The seconds you ignore are seconds spent losing options, shrinking control, and letting consequences grow louder while you remain distracted. Finally, clarity is merciless because it is impartial. It doesn't comfort, negotiate, or favor those who are lucky. It doesn't care about identity, reputation, or self-image. It only cares that you see, that you understand, that you acknowledge reality for what it is, not what you wish it were. When clarity arrives, it doesn't knock politely. It doesn't wait. It doesn't give grace. It forces recognition, exposes hesitation, dissolves illusions, and demands that you either act with what you have or face the consequences of failing to act, all while time continues to move forward, unrelenting, unforgiving, and completely indifferent. Excuses expire when the instruction is final. People like to believe that as long as a message is optional, as long as consequences are distant, they have room to maneuver. They cling to justification, to narrative, to delay, to the belief that their choices don't matter yet. But final instructions strip all of that away. They don't arrive for negotiation or debate. They arrive as endpoints, leaving no room for pretense, no buffer for convenience, no space to pretend that inaction is harmless. Excuses are seductive because they protect the ego. They allow people to maintain a version of themselves that feels competent, ethical, prepared. I didn't have time. I didn't know it would matter. I thought someone else would handle it. These statements are comforting because they transform accountability into a story, something malleable, something that softens the edges of reality. A final instruction, though, doesn't care about stories. It only cares about outcomes. Humans are naturally resistant to responsibility. Responsibility is heavy, inconvenient, and uncomfortable. Most people would rather wait for clarity, hope for guidance, or hide behind ambiguity than face the raw weight of choice. Excuses exist to make that weight bearable. They delay confrontation with reality and create the illusion that time, attention, and effort can be borrowed indefinitely. A final instruction makes that illusion impossible. It tells you there is no more borrowing, no more delay, no more excuse. Excuses only work when consequences are distant. The longer the deadline, the easier it is to rationalize inaction. People convince themselves that they are being strategic, thoughtful, patient. They wear procrastination as armor, telling themselves it is prudence rather than avoidance. But when the instruction is final, consequences are immediate or inevitable. Excuses lose their power because delay is no longer an option, and avoidance becomes a liability. Most people are convinced that good intentions protect them, that their plans, their hopes, their careful procrastination somehow shield them from failure. But final instructions expose the truth. Intention is meaningless without action. The more you relied on imagined preparation, the more exposed you become when clarity arrives. Excuses crumble under the weight of immediacy, because no one can argue with what must happen right now. Reality doesn't negotiate with intention, and neither does a final instruction. Excuses also disguise fear. People avoid responsibility, confrontation, and action because it is easier to stay small, hidden, and comfortable. They pretend the stakes are lower than they are, or that circumstances are not urgent. They tell themselves that someone else will take care of it. Final instructions burn through fear by compressing time and clarifying priority. When the moment of action arrives, you can't delay or rationalize. You're exposed to the truth of your own habits. The finality of instruction highlights how often people rely on avoidance as a strategy. They believe that if they ignore a problem long enough, it will disappear. They treat postponement like a solution. They substitute distraction for engagement. Every excuse becomes a reinforcement of inaction. Final instructions strip away all the camouflage. They force recognition, forcing the individual to confront what has been, building quietly in the background while life continued as usual. Excuses also manipulate perception. They make you believe that your actions or lack of them are less consequential than they actually are. They whisper that the timeline is flexible, that someone else will intervene, that luck will save you. A final instruction doesn't allow manipulation of perception. It forces the eyes open, the mind present, and the body ready. There's no narrative to lean on, no comfort to buffer the shock, No story to convince yourself that delay was acceptable. People underestimate how dangerous excuses become when finality approaches. Every postponed choice, ignored warning, or rationalized fear compounds into a reality that no longer bends to comfort. A final instruction reveals that the world does not pause for hesitation. It shows that the weight of ignored opportunities accumulates quietly until the moment arrives when inaction becomes the most visible failure. Excuses, once protective, become liabilities. The cruelty of final instructions is that they expose character in the rawest form. How someone responds when excuses no longer function defines who they truly are. Panic, hesitation, or impulsive reaction reveal habits more accurately than years of self-description ever could. The mind is forced into action, and the quality of that action is shaped entirely by what has been practiced, ignored, or postponed. Excuses are fragile. They exist only when time and uncertainty provide space to hide. A final instruction compresses both, leaving the individual alone with responsibility, exposure, and consequence. Those who survive the compression do so not because they had better intentions, but because they cultivated awareness, decisiveness, and honesty long before the instruction arrived. Every second spent rationalizing, delaying, or avoiding magnifies the contrast between what could have been and what must now be faced, leaving only the stark necessity to act, immediately, decisively, and without the comforting shield of excuses. Responsibility can no longer be delayed. People live as if it can. They fill their lives with distractions, routines, and stories that let them pretend accountability is optional. I'll get to it later, they whisper to themselves, believing time is flexible and consequences are patient. But responsibility is relentless. It does not wait. It does not negotiate. A final instruction forces the confrontation that delay has been avoiding, exposing every hesitation, every misjudgment, every moment of avoidance that has accumulated like debris in the corners of life. Humans are allergic to accountability. Most spend their existence dancing around it, rationalizing, delegating, or deferring. It is heavy, uncomfortable, demanding. People prefer comfort, distraction, and reassurance over confrontation with the truth of their action. Delaying responsibility feels safe because it provides the illusion of control, but the illusion is fragile. When the final instruction arrives, that illusion shatters instantly. You see the gap between who you thought you were and what you actually did, and there is no way to patch it up with stories or excuses. The reason responsibility is so uncomfortable is because it exposes patterns of behavior. People like to believe that their intentions define them. They rely on virtue, hope, and imagined preparation. But in the last moments, only action matters. Every delay, every hesitation, every choice to ignore warning signs comes into focus. Responsibility doesn't care about plans or promises. It only cares whether you respond when the moment demands it. People convince themselves that consequences can be managed later, that the pile of unfinished obligations, ignored signs, and postponed choices will somehow dissolve, rearrange, or excuse themselves. But responsibility doesn't wait for convenience. It arrives precisely when it is unavoidable, and the longer you postpone action, the heavier it becomes. Small decisions accumulate into critical pressure points. What you ignored yesterday doesn't vanish. It transforms into the challenge you must confront now, uncompromising, unavoidable. The discomfort of responsibility is also a mirror. It reflects truth without kindness. It shows where you failed, where fear dictated inaction, where hesitation allowed chaos to grow quietly in the background. People prefer stories because stories soften that reflection. They obscure accountability in narrative. But a final instruction, When coupled with the relentless presence of responsibility, strips stories bare. You are left with your actions, your avoidance, and the consequences that grow from them. Responsibility is not abstract. It is not a philosophical concept or a suggestion for moral reflection. It is measured in timing, alignment, and recognition. The delayed choice that seemed harmless becomes tangible, measurable, and urgent when a final instruction lands. Every postponed decision is no longer a theoretical what if. It is now a live problem, a ticking consequence, an immediate test of whether you have cultivated the awareness and skill to act decisively. People resist responsibility because it demands presence, it demands focus. It exposes weakness and hesitation, and it challenges comfort. Life without confrontation with responsibility feels manageable because you can ignore outcomes, avoid hard choices, and conceal your flaws behind narratives of intention. But delay is deceptive. It doesn't protect you. It merely postpones exposure, letting problems accumulate quietly until they arrive with undeniable clarity, demanding recognition, demanding action, demanding that you meet them on their terms. Responsibility also teaches that timing is everything. People confuse preparation with delay. They believe that waiting allows them to gain control, to gather insight, to make the perfect choice. But timing is impartial. It rewards presence, not hesitation. It punishes avoidance, not ignorance. A final instruction compresses timing into immediacy, leaving no margin for error. Those who have deferred responsibility find themselves facing the consequences of every ignored warning, every postponed action, every false sense of readiness they relied upon. The most frightening thing about unavoidable responsibility is that it is impartial. It does not excuse fear, inexperience, or distraction. It does not favor hope over hesitation, comfort over vigilance, or intention over action. Every individual receives the same test, act or fail. And the outcome is determined not by what you meant to do, but by what you actually do in the moments you can no longer postpone. Even courage is revealed in relation to responsibility. People imagine courage as something heroic, something that emerges in crisis. But courage under pressure is not a spontaneous gift. It is the product of preparation, awareness, and practice. Responsibility reveals whether courage exists in your habits or only in your imagination. When the instruction is final, there is no room for rehearsal, no chance to conjure bravery on demand. You act, and in that act, your true nature is revealed. Responsibility also forces recognition of limits. People like to believe they can handle everything, that skill, luck, and preparation can stretch infinitely. A final instruction proves otherwise. It compresses the timeline, exposes vulnerabilities, and forces decisions that reveal not just what you can do, but what you should have done all along. Every moment of avoidance or delay becomes amplified, and every action is measured against the reality of what was ignored, leaving nothing to hide behind. The weight of responsibility in the final moments is both clarity and punishment. It clarifies the truth of your life choices, and it punishes the habit of postponement. There is no external judgment, only the impartiality of consequences. The final instruction does not lecture or wait. It does not negotiate. It stands there, undeniable, uncompromising, and relentless, forcing confrontation, demanding action, and revealing every delayed choice that has brought you to this precise moment, while the second vanish and the opportunity to hide dissolves into the inevitability of truth. Silence was already a warning. People think warnings are loud, obvious, theatrical, designed to grab attention. That's the comforting version. The truth is, the most effective warnings are quiet. Subtle shifts in behavior, small patterns that repeat just slightly off, discomfort you try to ignore. Intuition whispering that something isn't right, all of that is warning. People dismiss it because it doesn't demand immediate action. They treat it like background noise, something ignorable, something that will fade if they continue pretending everything is normal. Quiet warnings are dangerous because they exploit our need for comfort. Humans are naturally drawn to routine, to familiarity, to the predictable. The subtle signs of danger or consequence blend into that comfort. They appear ordinary, trivial, manageable, and while you're rearranging your world to feel safe, the warning continues, persistent and unnoticed, gathering strength, waiting until ignorance is no longer an option. People underestimate how much time they have to notice warnings before consequences arrive. They assume they'll recognize danger when it becomes urgent. That assumption is a lie. Warnings exist precisely to prevent urgency from ever reaching the point of chaos. The subtle signals are there to test your attention, your perception, and your willingness to act before you are forced to. Ignoring them is tempting because it preserves comfort, but the cost is unseen until it is undeniable. Warnings are also merciless teachers. They do not care about pride, hope, or self-image. They do not pause for reflection, for doubt, or for comfort. They exist to illuminate patterns, to expose avoidance, to show you the discrepancy between who you claim to be and how you behave. A quiet warning that goes unnoticed is a mirror held up to your habits. It reflects every choice you ignored, every small postponement you practiced, every distraction you welcomed in place of engagement. People rely on the illusion of clarity. They think they'll know when action is necessary. That instinct will scream, that alarm will sound, that chaos will announce itself. Quiet warnings dismantle that illusion. They demand that you interpret signs without drama, that you feel unease without proof, that you trust discomfort without confirmation. They teach that awareness is not optional, and that perception is a skill, not a passive state. Ignoring quiet warnings is habitual. It is reinforced by years of experience where discomfort passes, where hesitation seems harmless, where delay feels like safety. People forget that every ignored whisper compounds. Every postponed response becomes part of the problem. By the time clarity arrives in an obvious form, the consequences have already grown to match the cumulative weight of avoidance, leaving little room for adjustment and even less room for surprise. Quiet warnings also test courage, not the cinematic, dramatic courage people imagine, but the patient, vigilant kind that notices, acknowledges, and responds without fanfare. It requires seeing what others dismiss, listening when the world is silent, and acting when the temptation is to wait. Most people are unpracticed in that kind of courage because it is unglamorous, inconvenient, and uncomfortable. They prefer alarms, explosions, crises they perform under spectacle, not under subtlety. The cruelty of unnoticed warnings is their invisibility. They blend into life. They mask themselves as minor inconveniences, fleeting discomforts, casual observation. They give you room to feel safe while shaping the conditions for surprise. People who survive are those who cultivate the ability to perceive the extraordinary. In the ordinary, the danger in the calm, the necessity in hesitation, warnings are impartial. They do not favor intelligence, status, or preparation. They reward attention and punish neglect. Every ignored signal, every postponed recognition, every rationalization is a deposit into a growing debt of consequence. And when time finally demands action, that debt is collected without mercy. Those who have trained themselves to notice early act decisively. Those who ignored subtlety react desperately. The difference is not luck, it is perception. People misunderstand the value of warning because they associate it with drama. Real warning is quiet, persistent, unassuming. It waits while you are distracted, while you are comfortable, while you are asleep in your own illusions. It is a teacher of presence, forcing awareness without spectacle, and showing the truth of patterns that have been building under your nose. Ignoring warnings is seductive, because comfort feels real, immediate, and safe. But safety in ignorance is always temporary. Every quiet warning ignored is a moment surrendered, a choice made for short-term ease at the expense of long-term consequence. The world doesn't need to shout. The consequences arrive precisely, impartially, inevitably. Every ignored whisper contributes to the inevitability of exposure when time collapses, and clarity can no longer be postponed. Action matters more than belief. People spend their lives wrapped in conviction, wrapped in ideals, wrapped in the comforting illusion that thinking about something or believing in it is enough. They repeat mantras, quote wisdom, and convince themselves that intention is power. Belief feels active, but it is mostly passive. It allows people to feel moral, capable, prepared, without ever moving. Action, on the other hand, is brutal. It demands presence, consequence, and energy. It doesn't care how noble your thoughts are, or how pure your intentions feel. Belief is seductive because it is easy. You can hold a belief without risk. You can repeat it without cost. You can structure your identity around it without proof. You can feel empowered while the world continues its motion, while consequences accumulate, while opportunities slip by. Belief gives the illusion of control without requiring engagement, without demanding accountability, without forcing the confrontation that action demands. Action exposes truth. While belief allows for storytelling, action strips pretense. What you do reveals more about who you are than what you think. People imagine courage in thought, discipline in planning, dedication in vision. But when the moment demands action, all those imagined virtues are irrelevant. What matters is what you do when hesitation is dangerous, when time is fleeting, when the consequences are unavoidable. Action is the language of reality. Belief is merely the rehearsal. Belief also delays urgency. People tell themselves that thinking about a problem, believing in a solution, or visualizing an outcome is preparation. It isn't. It postpones actual engagement. Action is the only thing that tests readiness. The longer belief substitutes for doing, the heavier the cost becomes. Ignoring opportunity or responsibility while nurturing faith and intent is a slow accumulation of consequences that will eventually demand attention in a moment where delay is no longer possible. People conflate belief with safety. They imagine that as long as they hold the right ideals, speak the right word, and feel committed internally, the world will bend to match their mindset. But reality does not respond to belief. It responds to action. Every task left incomplete, every responsibility ignored, every warning unheeded is indifferent to your conviction. Consequences do not negotiate with belief. They act according to what was done or left undone. Action also tests courage. True courage is not the dramatic defiance of chaos, the heroic speech, or the imagined bravery you carry in thought. True courage is the willingness to move when moving is inconvenient, dangerous, or uncomfortable. It is acting when hesitation feels easier, when the mind screams delay, when the world whispers that comfort is safer. Belief can give you confidence, but action is what proves it. The relationship between belief and action is revealing. People believe they are capable, responsible, prepared, ethical. Those beliefs remain invisible until action demands them. The final measure is not the purity of thought, but the decisiveness of movement. In moments where instruction is final, where consequences are immediate, belief without action is worthless. It cannot shield, cannot influence, cannot prevent exposure. Only action can. People often overestimate their preparation. They imagine their knowledge, morals, or convictions as tools of defense. But without movement, without implementation, these tools remain inert. A final instruction strips away belief as armor. It forces confrontation. It exposes whether you relied on thought or engaged through movement. Every hesitation becomes visible. Every delay a reflection of misplaced faith in your own capacity to act without doing. Action is not merely reactive. It is deliberate engagement with reality. It converts intention into consequence, belief into impact. People fear action because it carries immediate risk, requires clarity, and reveals truth. Belief is safe. Action is perilous. But survival, success, and consequence favor those who act decisively rather than those who only believe wisely. The world does not reward thought alone. It only rewards engagement. Belief can provide motivation, comfort, and vision, but it cannot replace the necessity of movement. Every situation where the final instruction matters is an arena in which belief without execution is exposed as a lie. The person who hesitates, who reflects, who rationalizes, who trusts thought alone finds themselves facing outcomes they imagined but never acted upon. Action is impartial, merciless, and immediate. Belief is a spectator. Action is a participant. Finally, action reveals character. Belief can be professed, cultivated, and displayed. Action cannot. What you do in response to a critical instruction, when time is compressed and consequences are unavoidable, tells the story that belief only pretends to write. It reveals what was cultivated in silence, in preparation, in habits, and in repeated choices. The last moments expose the difference between those who merely think and those who move, between those who imagine courage and those who wield it, between the passive believer and the active participant, while the seconds vanish and the world measures truth not by words but by deeds.
तेरी तारीफों से रुकता नहीं, शाही लिखावट के हर पन्ने में तकदीर है, सहमासा हूँ तुझ में, मानो तू ही मेरी तकदीर है क्या? तू दिल किया पुकार मेरी के सफर में कोई गुस्सा नहीं हो, दूरी तुझसे कितनी तेरी तारीफों से रुकता नहीं, शाही लिखावट के हर पन्ने में तकदीर है, सहमासा हूँ तुझ में, मानो तू ही मेरी तकदीर है क्या?
कि मुझे सामने पाँव में हम खड़े हैं देखा के राहों में, दिल को आके फिर से तू भी थाम ले, हम भी हाथों में तेरे ही नामों के अभी एग्जाम ले, करने वालों में तेरे रहे हिसाब, ये आंखों में रहे हैं तेरे छोटे पाप, ये कैसे करें